make another announcement about maintaining social distance, please. We're gonna get started. What brought us together today was the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police. This is far from an isolated event. Police killings have happened for hundreds of years. In fact, many police departments originated as black slave patrols. When we in the medical field hear the three words, "I can't breathe," we rush to the patient's side. Yet systemic racism, structural oppression, and white supremacy continues to suffocate our black communities. We must ask ourselves, why has the medical community been silent about this? Our chapter, along with institutions across the country, are coming together with their community and colleagues to mobilize against police brutality, anti-blackness, and white supremacy. White Coats for Black Lives is not just a tagline or hashtag. Our organization has a vision, and our actions are grounded on the politics of police and prison abolition, anti-capitalism, and anti-imperialism. We explicitly name racism and white supremacy as the root causes of disparities seen in our country. We urge you to familiarize yourself with our common vision to safeguard the lives and well-being of our patients through the elimination of racism. As such, all White Coats for Black Lives chapters are united in declaring and enacting these three goals.
Goal number one, end racial discrimination in medicine. Acknowledge the racist roots of the medical field and call out racism. There has never been any period in American history where the health of Black Americans was equal to that of white Americans. Health disparities are due to racism, not race. Look around you. The signs people are holding up highlight some of the devastating statistics of health inequalities. In our home state and of Minnesota and nationally. Ask yourself, is this a status quo I can accept? If you answered no, consider these next steps. Demand that medical centers serve the healthcare needs of their local communities, particularly the needs of Black patients. Promote the allocation of funding for interventions that dismantle racism and remove barriers to equitable medical care. Vote and organize to ensure quality, equal access to medical care by advocating for the establishment of a single-payer national health insurance program.
Goal number two. Closer to your mouth. Goal number two. Prepare future health providers to be advocates for racial justice. Faculty and students in Minnesota have called for mandatory content on the history and current manifestations of racism in medicine, the principles of anti-racism, the establishment and strengthening of ties with Black communities in Minnesota, and the denouncement and removal of race-based medicine from our medical curriculum. We must also improve the recruitment, support, and hiring of Black, Latinx, and Native American students and providers into leadership positions.
Goal number three, foster dialogue on racism, including police brutality, as a public health crisis. We demand the reallocation of funding from the Minneapolis Police Department to communities. Our medical institutions must partner with our community to lead health and safety strategies. Most importantly, we must listen to the needs of the Black community and allow them to guide us in the change we advocate for, ensuring that we are walking hand in hand with our Black patients and not in front of them. We must call on our peers, the Minnesota Department of Health, and all medical institutions to publicly recognize racism as a public health crisis and demand that they take actions to address it.
We would like to recognize the physicians in the obstetrics and gynecology department at HCMC for initiating this event. We also thank you all for coming today, but our actions cannot stop here. Medicine is political. So stop weighing the loss of career opportunities over Black lives. We must move beyond performative protests and hold our health institutions accountable for their complicity in sanctioning white supremacy and violence against Black bodies. To the hospital and medical school administrators here today, to the white healthcare workers here today, to brown people who benefit from proximity to whiteness, I ask you, how have you helped or hindered the work already being done by Black students or workers in your organization? How can you use the power of your voice and your vote to impact police and prison abolition efforts in your community? What can you do to make sure that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, David McAtee, I could go on, did not die in vain? The change we seek is built on their backs and on all the backs of Black people killed by white supremacy in the past 400 years. What would our community look like if the healthcare leaders amongst us who hold the most power and privilege were making these demands? Reflect on your implicit biases, behaviors, and actions and how they contribute to healthcare inequities. We will now take the next hour in silence. It is hot. This will be uncomfortable. This is to honor Mr. Floyd and countless other Black lives lost to police brutality before him. We will also repeat these same words on the other side of the crowd so folks can hear.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Thanks for being here. I just want to say thanks to Hennepin County for doing this. And if you look around, the people who've been speaking to you are first and second year medical students. That's our future. That's who's leading this. So I know we're in good hands, but as you heard, we need to do something else besides sit here and talk. We need action. I belong to one of the oldest organizations in this city to represent people of color, the Minnesota Association of Black Physicians. It's been around 40 to 50 years, and we've tried our best to make inroads into this problem right now. It's a shame it takes people to die in a crisis situation to get us off our butts. But that's what's happening. I was trying to let this Blackhawk clear out of here. having rode in those things numerous times. But I guess just like everything else, we have to overcome. So we all have personal stories. My story is I came here to Minnesota, had a great advantage in my own personal state, and have been very comfortable in my position. Comfort's out. There's no more comfort. We need to act. And each of us with our story needs to share that story and take advantage of our networks to advance this cause. One of my colleagues this year used to be president of the Minnesota Association of Black Physicians. I'd like her to tell her story and give some insight into what our organization does, as well as a way forward. I know.
Good afternoon, Minnesota. Good afternoon, Minnesota. Can you hear me? No. No?
You can't go up. You can't go up to that.
No, can't take my mask off. I've got surgeries to do on Monday. Can you hear me? I'm screaming louder. Does that work better? Good afternoon, Minnesota. We are still a great state, right? All of you being here shows that you care about this issue. You are here because all lives matter, right? All lives matter, everybody. The problem is that at times we forget that Black lives matter, right? Okay? Let's define privilege. Privilege doesn't mean your life isn't going to be hard. Privilege just means that the color of your skin isn't one of the things making it harder. So, when we practice medicine, we want you to hear the words, I can't breathe, and that is colorless. I can't breathe is universal. Breath flows through all of us in the same way. I can give any of you a heart transplant. Okay, I want to live for a while. I'm not. But that's the story. We are all one. And we are here to emphasize in medicine that in Minnesota, we can lead the way and not have George Floyd's death go unnoticed. Have this be a temporary thing and that we forget about it. As the people standing here represent, what we really want is for the medical profession to continue to lead with our heart, lead colorless, lead showing that we all bleed red. Did you ever see a blue blood, black blood? Not really. We all bleed red. So our motto, what we want to make you all aware of is that yes, all lives matter, but let's recognize that Black lives matter too. When you see a patient of color, how we can move forward is for you to treat that patient with respect. You may not know their background, you may not know what they really want, but you know what you want and how you would want to be treated, and that's what we're asking for you. To treat all patients like you want to be treated until you know how they want you to treat them. Today, thank you very much for coming out. Our organization, Minnesota Association of Black Physicians, I've been the president. We have Dion Hart, who is the president currently. Dr. Charles Crutchfield has been the president. His dad has been the president. We are strong, but we needed the young people to get us out here and mobilized. And we just thank all of you for being here because we know that nothing happens with just one voice. Something happens, a lot can happen with us all united as we are today. So do not let the events of the past week go in vain. Don't let us just go back to the way things were. Let us truly unite, intertwine to make a difference going forward. Thank you again for being here.
I just want to thank, again, on behalf of White Coats for Black Lives, the Minnesota Association of Black Physicians, I would like to thank the physicians in the obstetrics and gynecology department at HCMC. Once again, thank you for organizing. And I want to thank you all for showing up. But the march continues. We'll close out with a song.
All right, first of all, thank you for talking with me. This is completely off the record if you want it to be. There's just one thing I have to ask right away, and is that do you give me your consent to record and publish this interview?
Yeah.
Yes. Cool. All right, well, I'll just ask the question and then I'll, hand the mic to you guys and you can answer individually. All right, the first question is, what has been your experience during the protests following the death of George Floyd, both positive and negative?
So the positive part is that, so many people have come out and support, black people and just for change and equality and justice, So the negative part is, how he died. That's, I don't even know how to explain that right now, yeah. That's the most negative part. I don't care about the looting, I don't care about whatever, burnt down and stuff like that. But him being killed, that's a great, yeah.
Thank you, and I'll ask you the same thing. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, that's fine. Yeah, again, as she had mentioned, the positive part, I would say, is at least there's more awareness now. And I feel like the hashtag Black Lives Matter has now gone viral. But, this is an issue that has been, demanding people's attention for such a long time, especially white America, that it took so long. It took so long for white America to wake up and to realize that this is an issue that is still ongoing. It's not something that happened, a long time ago, and it doesn't really happen. It's still very much alive, and a lot of attention needs to be paid to it. And I'll say the negative part is I still hear some people talking about the looting and the burning, which I'm not saying I condone it, but it's a consequence. It's a consequence of these issues that have been going on for so long and have not been dealt with, have been ignored, And even us as, black people in the healthcare field, we're silent even at work because we feel like if we're going to say anything, we're going to be labeled as, oh, she's maybe an angry black woman, or she's being too dramatic, or, it's really not that bad. And that's what I would say is is the negative. And, there's still some people who are not really looking at what actually happened and are putting more energy towards, the looting and the burning. And like I said, not per se I condone it, not that I condone it, but I think this had to happen. And it's sad that it took all this to happen. So it's very sad for America. But, we pray for real change to come. And we need more people in the healthcare field who are in higher places to be people of color, to be black. We don't see enough of that. We really don't. So I pray that, there's a big turnaround from this. So that's all.
Thank you so much. My second question would be, what change specifically are you fighting for during the protest?
We're fighting for equality, and justice for, all three people that brutally, murdered by police, so we're fighting for that, so that white and black, everybody has the same privilege and equality, not just being white privilege. Supposed to be black privilege. Everybody's supposed to have the same privilege when it comes to equality and stuff. Racism needs to stop. Not because of your color, and then you have to be put aside. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, same thing I should mention, equality, equality across the board, legal system, healthcare field, just everywhere, regardless of what your economic status is as a black person, you should still be treated equally. We don't want to be, we're sick and tired of being treated, being second rated, and people being treated like animals, being gunned down in the street like animals. We are human beings as well. We're all created equal in God's image, right? So we should all, treat each other equally with love, with, no prejudice. And that's pretty much it. So.
Thank you. My last question would be, what would you like to tell people outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul about the protests that are going on in our cities right now?
Well, I'm going to to tell them that the protests don't just stop after the burial of George Floyd. We still need to continue to protest peacefully, to gain justice for everyone and equality, So we just need to just protest peacefully. That's my message, peaceful protest.
Thank you. And same question.
Yeah, I would say, to continue to strive towards, creating equality. Continue to strive toward that, continue to have those conversations, continue to make yourself more aware, educate yourself. If you keep at that, then there's going to be real change. So I challenge everyone to do it, especially white America. Educate yourselves, educate your family members, your children, because children, especially, that's where it starts. I've experienced racism and discrimination from when I was a little kid going to Catholic school here. People not wanting to, little kids not wanting to shake my hands, or if they shake my hands, they're rubbing their hands against their clothes because I'm black, and it equates to being dirty. And up to today, even, we have nieces who are still going through the same thing in 2020. It should not be. So that's what I have to say to that question.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing that with me. I really do appreciate it very much. All right, first of all, thank you for chatting with me. One thing I have to ask right out of the gate is, do you give me permission to record and publish this?
I do.
Okay, great. So my first question would be, what has been your experience during the protest following the death of George Floyd, both good and bad?
Just as you said, it's both good and bad. The good part of it is the message is getting out. It's been too long. We've been experiencing this racism, police brutality, disparity among blacks. I think this protest brought out the awareness all over the world. Everybody is saying it, that this is something that should stop. The negative aspect is, I think the message is being lost based on the looting, that it is so sad. Because the people that they had their property destroyed, they are not police, they are not government, they are individuals. So that sicked me. You know what I mean? I felt so sad about that. So that is the negative aspect.
Thank you. My second question would be, what change specifically are you fighting to see while protesting?
You see, we all bleed the same blood. We are all one, right? As such, we should be treated alike. Okay? In the case of George, what was so painful, what happened to him will hardly happen to a white man. That man begged for mercy until he gave his last breath. That is the saddest part of it. So I think we should all come together and understand that we bleed the same blood, we are one, and we should be treated as such.
Thank you. And that brings me to my last question would be, what would you like to tell people outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul about the protests happening in our cities right now?
Again, everybody should understand that the protest is to bring out good things. Just the only difficult part of it is some people hijacked it and they started doing wrong things. So we should see the good out of the protest, not the evil out of the protest. So that is what I'm going to wish everybody. Just see the good. Look at what happened here today. Peaceful, right? This is the kind of thing I want people to see, not the looting, the destruction. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I really do appreciate it. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for talking with me. There's just one thing I have to ask right away, and is that, do you give me permission to record and publish this interview?
Yes.
Great. So this is a candid interview, but you can be on the record if you want. My first question would be, what has been your experience during the protest following the death of George Floyd, both positive and negative?
Yeah. So I'll start with the positive. I love to see different people in our community out in the streets demanding change, sitting and standing in solidarity with one another, coming together to clean the community, donating things to the communities and clinics that lack resources. on a negative aspect, 2 classmates and I were actually shot at with rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbangs as we were helping to treat injuries of protesters. The sheer brutality of the Minneapolis police and the National Guard. It's been a disgusting display of power, and they need accountability, and I hope in the future we can have that. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question would be, what change specifically are you fighting to see while protesting?
Yeah. First and foremost, I want to center the Black communities and the issues that are inflicting not only myself, but people across Minneapolis who look like me. Police brutality should be seen as a public health issue, as well as its roots related to racism. I'd like to see the Minneapolis Department of Health recognize police brutality and racism as public health crises in our community so that resources and funding can be allocated efficiently.
Thank you. And that brings me to my last question, which is, what would you like to tell people outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul about the protests that are happening in our cities?
Yeah, I'd say don't believe the dominant narrative. Our city is strong. Our city is coming together. There are agitators, white supremacists that are attacking Black and brown businesses, are attacking peaceful protesters. The police and the National Guard are also being brutal to us, and that's not getting enough recognition. And I call on all those outside of the states, show up in your own communities and start to demand these same changes.
Thank you so much for sharing all that and talking with me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, first of all, thank you very much for talking with me. This is completely off the record. There's just one thing I have to ask right away, and is that, do you give me consent to record and publish this interview?
Definitely, there's consent.
Thank you. My first question is, what has been your experience during the protest following the death of George Floyd, both good and bad?
Well, when it started, there was a lot of power and there was a lot of anger, which was expected. I think what I found was one of the good things was the love and the community that came together. There were understandably a large part of our community that didn't understand codes, hashtags, or just different things being said amongst the protesters. And when I joined, there were some things that I also didn't understand, and there were people around me that were willing to teach me. And there were people around me that were willing to explain a little bit of the history. For example, being the Minneapolis Police Union. I'm not from here, and I only moved here a year ago, and I have not been around the police at all, so I didn't understand that. I didn't know who Bob Kroll was. And being around people from Minneapolis, I learned a little bit about the injustices and how the system is set up and how difficult it is to get rid of police officers that commit these injustices. And I think that was something that made me a lot closer to more people of color, especially the Black folk, in my medical school class and in the community. So I think I want to thank the community here just for being patient and for teaching me overall.
Well, thank you. My next question would be, what change specifically are you fighting to see while protesting?
So I want to speak directly to the communities that aren't Black, and that includes people of color that aren't Black, including myself. I'm a Latina. I'm originally from Mexico, and I grew up around a lot of people that looked like me and spoke Spanish. When I moved to Baltimore, I lived in a mostly Black community, and I realized how much of a minority I am. And while going through that experience of realizing that I am a minority in the United States, I also felt the pain of a community that was mourning the death of Freddie Gray at the time. And going through that, I realized that it's not about what color you are, it's about standing up for what's wrong and amplifying the voices of those around you that are feeling those injustices, even if you are not. And I come here, and this is my first time living in a predominantly white community. And after the incident happened, after George Floyd was murdered, the white people around me bowed their heads in silence for maybe a day and were ready to move on. And that's not okay. And I want to speak to the white community, the Latinx community, the Native American community to stand up with them, amplify their voices, and keep going. Because this isn't going to just stay being a hashtag for 1 week or 2 weeks. I think this needs to continue because Freddie Gray was a week of riots in Baltimore. And sure, people were angry, but then it died and nothing happened. So that's my message.
Thank you. And that brings me to my last question, which is, what would you like to tell people outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul about the protests in our cities?
I think we're heading into the right direction. The riots, the destruction, the arson, the fire, it was wrong. It hurt many communities and it hurt many families that have worked hard to get there. People were voicing their anger, and we have come together as a community to understand that that's not okay, and that hasn't kept on going on. So their destruction has come to a close. I can't say that it's completely gone because I'm sure there's a few people out there still doing it. But that being said, we are making sure that the peaceful protests continue. We have made institutional advances to changing the University of Minnesota. So we have submitted letters to our curriculum leadership asking for curriculum reevaluations. We have reached out to the mayor. We have reached out to the governor's office. We have made committees trying to keep our leadership accountable for these changes. And so we've asked for action items, and we are starting to work with faculty that will back us up and keep this going for years to come. And so anyone who's here is trying to mobilize their communities to do the same. I'm part of a Latino community group in the Twin Cities that is trying to do the same. We are still fighting for our people. We're still fighting to keep families together at the border, still fighting for immigration, but we have to realize that this is also our issue to voice, and so we are joining the fight to make sure that Black lives do matter in Minnesota.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I really do appreciate it. First of all, thank you so much for just talking with me today. Just one thing of housekeeping I have to get out of the way is that do you give me consent to record and publish this interview?
I do give you consent to do that.
Thank you. That brings me to my first question, which is, what has been your experience during the protests following the death of George Floyd, both positive and negative?
Yeah, I can't say that I've really had any negative experiences, so I'll just speak to the positive ones. You know, it's tragic that our community has to come together because of someone's murder, but it's also been really beautiful to see everyone coming together. It's been really cool to see people from all kinds of walks of life and all types of abilities just come together and really be in solidarity with one another. So that's been a really empowering experience. You know, for me, I have been involved in all peaceful protests, so I can't speak to anything that has not been that. But yeah, just like really empowering to see and really inspiring for me and my classmates to really see what we can do to kind of enact change.
Thank you. My second question is, what change specifically are you fighting to see while protesting?
Yeah, well, I am a person in education right now. I'm a student, right? And I'm being taught by educators. And so for me, it's really important that I protest not only to stand in solidarity with my community, but also to kind of use my voice to affect change in the context of our curriculum. We're doing a lot of kind of on-the-ground background work with getting changes from our administration to include structural racism and police brutality in our curriculum as matters of public health and things that we need to be educated about to better serve our patients. So that's kind of something that I'm really I'm very much an advocate for and that I've really been pushing for with my classmates.
You're good.
All right, and that brings me to my final question, which would be, what would you like to tell people outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul about the protests going on in our cities right now?
Yeah, I want to say that the protests in our communities are a reflection of our community's ability to come together in light of a tragedy, in light of a murder, which is what happened to George Floyd. And I think it's important that people recognize that racism in our country is real. and it is killing people actively all the time. And I think that these protests are a reflection of the change that needs to happen. These protests show that we can come together as a community and we can really advocate for change in a way that we as protesters hope will be meaningful. And I want people to really see that as the message outside of anything else.
Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you.